Hey, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. So, I want you guys to know before I get into my book review that I always do a spoiler-free book review, so if you see me looking down sometimes, I just have notes so I don't give any spoilers away. So let's get into the book review for A Clockwork Orange. So the basic premise for Clockwork Orange is you're following, it's like in a dystopian future, you're following a teenager, he's 14, and basically in this future, the teenagers run wild, and they do a lot of bad things at night, they do things like that, and the police aren't very active in controlling them. So, and then this kid, Alex, he's 14, he's running a gang, and that's basically it. And you just follow like what he and his gang does and what happens because of the gang. So anyway, I just want you guys to know that before I get into my review, that they use a language, like he uses like this like made up language in there that has some like made up words that you can follow the scene. Then it's not difficult if you're following like the overall scene. But there are some parts that were confusing because of this like made up language that had words that you didn't really know or you had to like reference it. So I just want you to know that aspect. Another thing you guys should know is that I would say this book is like an adults only book. Like you want to be over 18 to read this book because there is a lot of violence in here and it gets pretty intense. Not only the descriptions, but some of the violence that he does, that Alex and his gang do, is pretty intense. And that basically, because it's about a book that there's a lot of mean people, there's a lot of crazy situations, and like when I say there's a lot of violence, these people are doing violence for fun. They're doing it for money, but they're also doing it for fun. So that's why I would say this book would be recommended only for adults. But anyway, let's get into my review about what I felt about the book. So, overall, this was kind of a weird book. It was sick, but it was kind of a weird book, as you'll see. I can't say too much because I don't want to give any spoilers, as it's not too long a book, but a lot changes throughout the book. So I can't say too much. But overall, I would say that this was a pretty weird book. But let me start with, like, even just the beginning. The beginning, something about it just did not grab me. It didn't grab me like some of these other books. I would not say that the beginning was bad. It's kind of fun seeing it. But I would say one of the tough parts about the beginning is the made-up words. Like, getting used to that. Like, I prefer to go into a book knowing, like, almost nothing about it. So I didn't even know that was going to happen. And, like, some of these made-up words were kind of weird because they definitely are in interesting situations, and there's some intense situations, so that is a lot of fun in the beginning, but just something about it, I just can't say why. Something didn't grab me fully. I didn't want to stop reading, but something didn't grab me. But with that being said, halfway through, it gets a lot more interesting. Definitely halfway through. Because I feel that he mixed it a lot better in the second half of the book. Like, he just mixed it a lot better because there were still the crazy situations, but I felt that a lot of things connected a lot better in the second half of the book. Like, I would put, like, the first half of the book was all right. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was just all right. Whereas the second half was very interesting, and that's where it gets a lot more intense. So, that's why there was something about it. But, and as for the end, I felt the end was just marginal. I judge an end by many things. I judge it on, like, first of all, if you like the end, but also, like, does it wrap things up? Because you don't like a lot of these, like, loose ends. I mean, I don't like those things. And overall, though, I felt the end was just marginal. By the way, I did read the unabridged version because I guess there was a chapter that they took out of the American version initially when they first released this in the 1960s. But I read the unabridged, so I got that extra chapter. But overall, I just felt the end was marginal because it felt like he skipped parts. Like the author, it just felt like some parts were skipped because they wouldn't fully explain how they got into a situation or a character or anything like that. And he would just give you the situation and give you that. And there was basically no background to that, to where that's why, even though I know he didn't, it just felt like he skipped parts. Like it felt like it would have been better if he had included a few more chapters to explain the situation a little better or explain things a little better instead of just like plopping a character down there towards the end. I felt that wasn't that good. So that's why I just felt the end was marginal. I didn't think it was horrible, but it was just like a whatever type of end. Now, the other thing is that I would say the end also felt rushed. It felt rushed given the build-up. Not only the build-up in the book, but even towards the end. There was a decent build-up to something and that you wanted to see, okay, what's going to happen? And then at the end, you're kind of just like, what? That's it? Type of ending. Because it felt rushed. Like there were, I shouldn't say that's it type of end, but it's like you do say, oh, well, that's it. But there is a tremendous build-up and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, boom, the end. And like I was shocked that the book just came to an end like that. So, that's why I said the end was just marginal. Now, as for the parts of the book that I did not like, I felt that the beginning was confusing. And as I said, the beginning didn't fully grab me. It didn't make me want to put the book down, but it didn't grab me. And maybe it didn't grab me because I thought the beginning was confusing. And, that was one part I didn't like about the book. And I think it was mainly because of that, like, made-up language. Because after a few chapters, it starts to make more sense because you realize there's this made-up language. But it just made it a lot harder. And I should say that I did the audio version, and I think in the hard copy version they do have like a reference to like what the words mean. But even then, from what I've read online, people had trouble with it because they had to keep referencing what different words meant. And again, I think that's the hard part about the beginning, but also the book as a whole, because there were parts that I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was just me. It looks like some people online felt somewhat the same, but maybe it's just me. But there were some parts I just didn't understand. And I have to put it back to like those made up words or basically that made up language. You still would get the overall scene, but I think those made up words, made up language made parts confusing. But then I also think that it took away from some of the scenes. That there would be a great scene, some intense things, and then they would throw in some kind of weird word or something that means different than what like the English language is saying, and it would just take away from the scene. And it's like if you had to reference it, you'd be like, oh, that's what it means. And again, for the amount of intense situations he has, I thought that made up language just took away from some of the scenes and just it took away from the book overall. Now, because there was that made up stuff, and for some of the older books, I do sometimes use the Spark Notes just to make sure that I'm understanding what's going on in the book, and, maybe it was just me that used it, but I did use it after every chapter just to make sure I understood the scene. And as I said earlier, a lot of times you could follow the overall scene, but there would be like that made up stuff would kind of throw you off a bit. And that's why I would use Spark Notes. So, that part, I don't like having to do that. I don't like having to read Spark Notes after every chapter. You want it to just flow from one to the next. So, I really think the made up language just brought it down a lot. But, overall, I enjoyed the story as I thought the philosophy was a lot of fun. I thought the whole philosophical thing behind the story was a lot of fun, and I thought that was good. But it still definitely was a weird book. It was definitely a weird book. I'm not saying it's a bad book, but it was definitely one of the weirder books out there. It's just, again, I can't say much without spoiling anything. So, but it was just, be aware that it was a weird book. And it was just because I think it was that it was a cool, like, that psychological aspect, but then the made-up language made it difficult. And then sometimes, like, during the chapter, you're not 100% sure what's going on because you have to take the overall scene and then That's why it was kind of a weirder book. But you know, I still enjoyed it enough, and you'll get the official rating in just a second. So anyway, well, let me just give my official rating now. So I always rate my books on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book that is just horrible. A 5 is an average, and a 10 is phenomenal. If it gets a 10 or anywhere near 10, you should definitely put it on your reading list, because I'm a tough critic. That is hard to move up even 1 point in my rating system, and a 5 is average. So, A Clockwork Orange. This is an interesting book to rate. Because I thought the story was a lot of fun, but it was a weird book. So because of that, you know, I'm going to rate this book, with a 5 being average, I'm going to rate it a 5.5, which is just slightly above average. It's still above average, but it's just slightly above average. And the reason being is that I thought this was a hard book to rate, or a weird book to rate, because I really enjoyed the storyline and like what was going on. But that made-up language just brought it down so much that sometimes there'd be confusion or anything like that, or it was just weirdness in the made-up language part. Not in the actual book, but the made-up language part. That just brought it down so much, or else it would have gotten a much higher rating, you know, because it was just, again, I still enjoyed the story. So, you know, to me, it just got a slightly above average, but that means that at some point, if you guys want to pick it up, you know, you should still go and pick it up at some point, but you don't have to rush to pick it up. Anyway, if you guys have any comments, questions, disagreements, please post it in the comment section below. I hope you guys click the subscribe button, as I always upload multiple different book reviews. Anyway, thank you for watching my book review. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.